All right, take two, everybody. Welcome to the Jordan, no, not the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. That's not the right podcast.
Criminal
Copyright infringement.
set yourself there.
Yeah, I know. I'm not Jordan Peterson. Okay, ready? Here we go. Welcome, everybody, to the Latter-day Lobster podcast, episode 2. We are so excited to be here with Jared Pinargote, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Yep.
Let me just introduce Jared really quickly for everybody. So we have a lobster conference, is what we're calling it, on September 26th at the Hyatt Place Hotel in Provo. Please feel free to RSVP online. It's going to be great. We have a lot of speakers lined up, including Morgan Aldis and Milton McClelland and Ali, Matt Soso. And it's going to be great. So Jared is one of our speakers. Jared, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just jump right into the podcast today.
Awesome. So, hello everyone. My name is Jordan Peterson. I am. There's a lot of things that I am, but most importantly, I'm married to my lovely wife Christina. I'm a father to my 1-year-old daughter, and I'm a virtual reality and augmented reality software engineer. And so a lot of what I do for work is getting people to open up to new technologies and convince them that it's useful for their domain. And so I just generally love talking about philosophy, theology, and getting, I think my tagline that I just recently discovered this week was I want to get people to see something new, get people to see what I see that I've never seen before. So that's kind of my spiel. And what was the other thing that you were saying?
No, I mean, yeah, just introduce yourself. You're going to be speaking at Lobster Conference, so we're all excited about that. Lobster Conference is something that we do every year. Morgan sort of started this tradition, and then we've just kept it going, and it's been super awesome hearing everyone's insight. So what we're going to do today is, I guess we can explain a bit more about what the Latter-day Lobster podcast is, kind of our goal. Anthony, I think you can also share your thoughts on this since we both kind of had this idea, but we kind of just wanted to get everyone in the group kind of more familiarized, and we wanted to get to know everybody, and we figured like doing a podcast would be great to kind of make it more real for everyone. So yeah, Jared is our first guest besides us two on the podcast, and what we're going to talk about today basically will be just like how we kind of ran into Jordan Peterson's work. So let's start with, or Anthony, did you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say, excited to talk about it. I think we all have our own like ways that we found Peterson, and then just kind of the friendships that came out of that have been pretty awesome. So that's all I want to say.
For sure. Yeah. For me personally, it's been just an amazing experience meeting all these different Latter-day Saints from different walks of life, different spiritual backgrounds, and different professions, all just come together and we all talk about spiritual topics. And then like Jordan Peterson has kind of helped us all just like have a vocabulary to talk about it. So Jared, tell us, how did you find Jordan Peterson as a Latter-day Saint? How did he resonate with you?
Shoot, where do we start? I guess I think it all really started around the 2016 meme war, like with the Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton and all that stuff. I had just gotten back from my mission. So I served a mission in Brazil, and that was from 2013 to 2015. I can probably go into this a lot later, but I grew up in the church of goodly parents. I love my parents, and they were excellent role models for me. There came a time closer to when I was about to head out on my mission where I started to have a lot of doubts. And I was always a very spiritually minded person, really into philosophy, personality studies, and near-death experiences, and all this kind of more kooky stuff that a lot of people don't necessarily like look into all the time. And so when I was struggling with that, I kind of started going down the rabbit hole and started like seeing all these, issues with the church and everything. And so I had this huge like anger, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go on my mission and take the church down from the inside. Very very prideful attitude. And then I got completely humbled by several great individuals, including my MTC branch president. And so anyways, that kind of prepared me to have my testimony, experience, and conversion to the Lord, as revealed through the restored gospel. And so when I came back, there's still a lot for me to kind of like explore politically, because my spirituality was opened and I served an amazing bishop. And I mean, like, I had my own issues there too, but when I came back, I was, ready to just hit the ground running with school and stuff. And so when I started to like really get into the field of politics, I saw a lot of like Bernie Sanders and giving free money to everyone. And I thought like, oh, that's obviously what Jesus taught, and, just really into it. And I never really thought too much about it. It was just, Bernie by default. And then I think it was a Steven Crowder video that like I came across it because YouTube recommended to me, and that's where it all starts, YouTube recommendations. And I just saw him wall up a lot of like the SJW rhetoric and everything. I was like, holy crap, never really confronted my political views like that. And then it just became obvious to me like Bernie Sanders wasn't it. And so I, went down that rabbit hole from Steven Crowder to Ben Shapiro. And then finally that brought me to Jordan Peterson. And what set Jordan Peterson apart from like the other political commentators was his personality psychology work, and entered philosophy, talking about Carl Jung and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and talking about the Bible and all of its like more inner psychological meanings. And I was like, holy crap, I found my people. Like everything that I was like super obsessed with as a kid, like kind of all culminated around this like cult following around this guy. I was just like, yeah, like all this stuff, and like viewing the Bible through such this like mystical and archetypal lens. It's just like, yes. And then eventually how I found this group was I participated a lot in the r/Latter-day Saint subreddit group. And someone just commented, hey, if you like Jordan Peterson, come check out our Facebook group. And ever since then, I've been constantly posting on that group. So that's my journey to Jordan Peterson.
So yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah. Something that you said really struck out to me, because I remember at one point you did post in the group something like along the lines of like, oh, I used to not be active, and I used to kind of be not anti or like against the church, but you just weren't super 100% in. But then engaging with the group kind of brought you back into activity. Is that accurate to say?
Oh, I think one, I was never technically inactive, but I was definitely like, I don't know what they call it on the internet now, but I was like physically in, mentally out. But actually being, oh, are you talking about the Reddit group? Like,
No, I'm talking about just you posted something like that in the Jordan Peterson group and online
okay.
in Latter-day Lobsters. Yeah.
No, the Jordan Peterson group definitely helped me mature my faith and see things differently. But luckily, my mission really helped me bring back to the track. And so I think the Jordan Peterson group has been very helpful, but unfortunately, that wasn't what brought me back to the church. It was the Lord and some branch presidents that I had in the MTC.
Nice. Okay. Well, good. It's a good thing to clarify that. And yeah, it was definitely the Lord that brought you back. I'm trying to think. I feel like your story is kind of unique because there's a lot of people who kind of just assume that everyone who's Mormon is just kind of like 100% in, and they kind of like are just dogmatic and like just run with it wholesale. What was it about? And you said something too, like you wanted to destroy it from the inside out. That's kind of pretty bold. Kind of a bold mission to undertake. What got you feeling that way?
I posted about this in the group, but it was actually the LGBTQ issue. So I'm straight. I'm married. I've never really struggled with any form of same-sex attraction, but I think as a very empathetic person and someone who thought about these things a lot, it just didn't click with me at all, the LGBTQ issue. And that together with addiction to pornography, it kind of incentivized me to really start thinking um, critically against the church, because if I could just prove that the church was wrong, then I could have a better theology about LGBTQ people, and I could not have to worry so much about like my issues with pornography and stuff. And so and it was difficult because I had so many spiritual experiences growing up, and it was just like I was looking at the sun and I was just hating the sun so much for what it was doing and shining light. And so I had a lot of energy and a lot of ambition, and seeing that I was like, I wanted to take it down from the inside, but I also wanted to say, I'm going to go to the belly of the beast. I'm just going to go into the mission to see like the gospel in its pure essence, like with people preaching it and stuff. And it's like, that was how I was going to learn the gospel. I was just going to like go there, MTC, basically Gospel University 101, and prove to myself that I was wrong. But I did the opposite. The Lord showed me that I was right with some powerful reprimands and some great visions, and I came back because of that.
See, I found that fascinating because actually a lot of people, it seems like, at least in more recent years, LGBT issues have kind of been a sticking point for them. And as you were saying that, I was just like, oh yeah, I definitely don't have anything to say about that, right? but but yeah, no, it's just interesting to me that that's really one of the bigger issues in the church right now, is just on gender and sexuality issues, and also more to the point of like with pornography and pornography addiction, right? It is a struggle for many Mormon men, and sorry, Latter-day Saint men, however you want to identify that. But I just find it interesting that you're kind of, like you said, trying to figure out like, okay, like what do I do with this in terms of my faith? There might have been some sort of dissonance, pretty strong dissonance, I'd imagine there, caused by that. And so I definitely appreciate that struggle. I've been through my own thing with that, and I don't know, there's something to be said, I think, too, about how we generally teach about sexuality and how we address pornography, and what's a good way to do it, what's a bad way to do it, right? It's a lot to go into there, but just more so, I just wanted to kind of touch on that it's kind of the bigger issues of our time, and of kind of what's going on in the church is really just around sexuality for the most part, and then gender to an extent too. So fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, every day we're reminded about the LGBT community and our brothers and sisters that are in that community, and I kind of the distance that is between us and them, and how we can like close that gap. It's definitely something that like so for example, I've always loved reading like anti-Mormon literature, right? And growing up, when I was 14, I would read anti-Mormon literature usually from the evangelicals, right? And that was pretty. I'm glad I ran into that at 14, because I could instantly tell like it was kind of like not the best argumentation on the planet.
Yeah.
um, but when it comes to, not to say that anyone who's in the LGBT community is anti-Mormon, but there's definitely heavy criticism thrown our way.
Sophisticated than actually evangelicals are.
What was that?
More secular. I was just going to say, sorry to interject, but I feel like it's a more secular, even more sophisticated at times criticism compared to the evangelical kind of,
Yeah,
the tropey kind of Christian arguments. Yeah, it's a lot harder that way to just deal with the thing.
yeah, exactly. Because the evangelicals, generally what they try to do is they try to point out contradictions in the text, right? And anyone who reads, yeah, right, exactly. And then anyone who reads literature, just like, it's not like I wouldn't say it's not a non-issue, but it's like it's pretty easy to kind of overcome those types of objections and have a sophisticated reading of a text, right? But with the LGBT community and kind of the issues that they bring, it now becomes, as far as I can tell, like an issues of values and things like inclusivity and equality and tolerance and loving, and those are harder to. You can't just brush those away. You kind of have to like really sit down and really think about them. And so that's not as far as I can tell, that's like probably one of the biggest, I don't want to say issue or like conflict, but it's like one of the more meatier topics that we have to like actually sit down and wrestle with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something to say about in the temple experience, you have kind of like the progression of the covenants. And the law of chastity is like the second highest covenant that you make right before the highest covenant, which is the law of consecration. And so yeah, when it comes to things like the evangelical arguments against biblical texts or just different religions, like at a certain point, you can point to the spiritual experiences, you can point to like better theological arguments, and that makes sense. You know, the character of God is something that we can kind of all agree on. It's just like specific parts of doctrine that, you know, we struggle with. That's fine. But as Anthony said, yeah, there's a lot more of a secular argument when it comes to the LGBTQ issue, and like you were saying, Alejandro, with love and intolerance and everything, that really gets at the core of what it means to be a Christian, to love someone. And is it loving to go to someone straight up to their face and say, you know, I don't believe that this is something that can be eternalized in the temples, and that God would have you repent and, you know, live the law of chastity as he's declared it? Like, that's a very bold statement to assume. And I honestly believe that if we can't, as Latter-day Saints, believe that, or if we struggle to believe that, then we're going to be struggling so much with a lot of the messaging that comes from, well, the general body of the church.
Yeah, I would even say, you know, and then there's the whole other side of like, you know, like, is it loving to not say anything if somebody's truly in error? You know, like, isn't it loving to correct them? And I definitely can appreciate that. You know, like Christ, you know, said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." He never stops loving us, I don't think, but he still expects us to grow and to become better. So, you know, there's a tension there for sure that a lot of people are trying to navigate right now, and you know, yeah, it's not easy.
And I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think kind of to add to that point, Anthony, I think that's why I've been so fascinated with Jordan Peterson over the past few years, is because for him to just basically, like, he got famous for saying that I'm not going to call you a girl just because you identify as a girl. I'll call you a boy.
Right,
Like, I'm not going to use your pronouns. And just for someone to just be so straight up like that was shocking, both to people who disagree with it, you know, passionately.
Yeah, that really set people on fire.
Yeah. And
it's
like,
funny to me because so much of what I love about Peterson has nothing to do with that, you know. But some people, it's very much like, yeah, sticking point.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting, it's kind of true that that sort of incident did kind of catapult Jordan Peterson into the limelight. And then I suppose he would say something like, "It's not that he refused to call someone by their pronouns; it's more that he didn't want ideologues to dictate in the law that he had to be compelled to use pronouns, which is kind of like a different issue." Right, exactly. But I was recently watching an interview with Jordan Peterson and Warren Farrell. He wrote The Boy Crisis, and he also he wrote a bunch of so he did a podcast with Jordan Peterson 2 weeks ago called The Four Do's and Don'ts of Divorce. Super insightful, highly recommend that you watch it. But one of the things that Jordan Peterson kind of said is and he said this kind of like as a tangent. He said something like, you know, one of the things that I've been criticized about is that I'm a believer in the value of the traditional family. I believe that children need a father figure and a mother figure to be well-rounded. And he says that as a clinical psychologist. So it's not like he's just saying that to be like, it's not like Jordan Peterson like thumps the proclamation to the family on his chest.
Yeah,
like
he's
some
not
people on the internet.
Christian,
right?
You know, like people keep asking him, "Do you believe in God?" And he won't even like give him a straight answer. He's like, "I act as if God exists, but I'm not going to answer you because you're not going to pigeonhole me." So it's not like you can just attribute it to like, you know, some right-wing Christianity or whatever like people like to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And so despite his sort of like him being in that gray area, he does say, well, I do believe that you know, children need a mother and a father, and that the traditional family is valuable, and that divorce should be avoided. He almost says in a lot of his videos, he'll say, you know, it should be avoided not at any cost, but like it should be like a pretty last resort type of thing. And that's kind of how he feels about it. And of course, as Latter-day Saints, we kind of like kind of like align. Yeah, we align with kind of those values. We believe in their traditional family. We don't take divorce lightly or marriage lightly, and we try to make things kind of work as best as we can. Um, not that, and that, I think that's the unique thing about our church is like we don't have anything against divorce like the Catholics do, but it's definitely like a last option for us.
I think it's interesting now that everyone's talking about that I think Jordan Peterson brings a lot of the same experiences that converts bring to the church. A lot of people who grow up in the church or and with family members who are members of the church is you don't necessarily see a lot of the pains of divorce. Like for example, myself growing up, my parents are together. As far as I know, most of my aunts and uncles have stayed together. Those that have separated live in Mexico, and I'm not too close with them. And so for me, divorce wasn't something that I saw a lot within my family. And so I guess
There's only a child of divorce. Yeah.
excuse me, or I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, yeah, and then like I'm a child of divorce, so it just depends on. Yeah, it could just like be anybody in the church, really.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because as someone who is a convert, they come with exposure to a lot of different ways of life. And Jordan Peterson, as a clinical psychologist, has years of seeing the variety of different family situations. And for him to see those patterns and say, I I don't ever think, or like I think that divorce rarely solves the issue is quite powerful, because as someone who apparently
Yeah.
doesn't grow up with, surrounded by that, or at least not several different iterations of the same situation through multiple different situations, it's really powerful to see it come from someone who has had that experience with several families of divorce.
So one of the things that resonates with me regarding Jordan Peterson's work is when he talks about meaning and sort of searching for meaning in one's life. And what he would argue is something like, if you want to have a meaningful life, then you have to take on as much responsibility as you can handle and carry it well and do the best you can to just take on, sort of to like lift your cross and follow Christ and kind of take up that type of responsibility. And one of the things that he does too is he talks about how taking up responsibility and then also sort of following like a meta narrative or like a grand narrative. I think he kind of expresses that when he talks about archetypes. Um, you know, he has that he likes to quote Jung, and Jung has that famous line where he says, "You should know what your myth is because you might not like it." Um,
Hmm.
and which I think is pretty profound because the human experience, despite the variety and the richness of the human experience, it can be like be put into a pattern that we all kind of like fit into. Now, here's a problem that I see with the LGBTQ community. Not the problem, like not that they're a problem, but like the problem that we're all sort of facing is the church and the stories that we read about. They give us that sort of meta narrative, that sort of um, pattern that by which we should lead our lives. And I it's a romantic narrative with this like the eternal marriage and like having
Yeah.
eternal prosperity. I can imagine that for people within the LGBT community, it's like how does their myth or narrative, like how does that fit in for them? Because
Right.
because if you take Jordan Peterson's sort of line of thinking, it's like you need a meta narrative to string your life together. The church sort of offers one, but then I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to just use language that has been used to death, but it's like people who within the LGBT community, that pattern doesn't jive with their live experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I actually have a lot to say on that now that you vocalized that, because I never really realized it. But I think when I don't know where he said it, but you're right. That he talked about where you need to find your myth. Like, what is your myth and where you fit into that narrative? And that drove me heavily into reading about the history of Israel and essentially the branch of Israel through the Book of Mormon. And when I went through that and for the past like few years and studied kind of that story, I realized that the narrative that is in the church about you get baptized, then you grow up and you return the gospel, then you go to the temple, then you get married, and you have many different kids. Like that's only a fraction of the meta narrative of the
Yeah.
scriptures. It's and that's not necessarily to say that there's per se room to have like a same-sex couple within the story of Israel. That's something I'm not neither like confirming nor denying, but it's just that the limited view that we have in the modern LDS church is I believe it's mostly for lack of looking into the scriptural narrative. Because if we're just going to
Yeah.
church on Sunday, listening to what's in gospel doctrine, we're not going to see the bigger picture. We're not going to see the redemption of Israel, the redemption of Zion, the creation of the heaven on earth and all that stuff. Understanding how we are descendants of these tribes of Israel, like mathematically speaking and whatnot. And like I had like visions and revelations like oh my gosh, I'm a descendant of Lehi or Manasseh, and my family has been preserved over generations. And like I think it's a failure to be spiritually self-reliant, to read into these stories, to understand the whole narrative of the redemption of Israel and Zion, that leads to one, a hunger within the church, and two, a lack of understanding where one fits into that meta narrative. Because if you're just looking at this siloed little, it's like, okay, I'm not going to get married in the temple with someone of the same sex. Like, where do I fit in? Like, look at the rest of scripture. There's still so much more beyond that. And obviously, God is, incredibly powerful, and he can reveal to you exactly what his plan for you is in that meta narrative if you study it out.
See, I love that. Like what you just said gave me chills. Because honestly, yeah, like I felt the same way. Like, we're just such a surface understanding, and it's so easy to get, as to borrow President Nelson's, like, where it's myopic about the gospel and like kind of like on a cultural level of we do these things and these are our milestones. But like I said, like some of the most like impactful, like the favorite parts of the Book of Mormon for me is honestly Fourth Nephi. Like right up before that and Fourth Nephi, like seeing what happens with the second coming and then like the effects. Like I get excited about Zion. I love talking about the law of consecration. I think it's going to be awesome to see it implemented someday. And like I want it now. Like I know I have a lot to work on to get it there in my own life, but I just feel like yeah, we're just kind of like moseying along, and we could be like doing so much more. And I feel like the prophets, I really believe they had that vision, right? Gather Israel, like do these things. We're kind of like, yeah, that's nice. Like that's nice that he says that, and they're just gonna go back to like the everyday, and we don't really see, like I said, that grand vision, right? Some people it takes like for you, right? Those visions and those revelations, and I feel like I've had those in my own life ever since I was younger. Like I had some really religiously based dreams. I was like a very very young child that I still remember this day, where it was clear that I had a destiny in Christianity, and so that's the stuff that gets me. That's why I like choral music. That's why I love this kind of like ethereal, like beautiful high church kind of music, is because it makes me feel like there's some great meaning to my life as a Christian. Whereas honestly, sometimes in the day to day, I forget that. Or even in church, we can just kind of be talking about like, this is the word of wisdom, and I'm kind of like just zoning out. But when we talk about forgiveness, when we talk about how we need to do our best not to offend and to build Zion, like that's what gets my gears going. And I think you're right, and it's something that I would do well to think on more now too. Is again, could it be that with even with the gay marriage thing, are we just kind of getting myopic there and saying, okay, so maybe like my role isn't to be married or whatever. I mean, my role is, but for other LGBT people out there, is there more there? And maybe when we do get revelation more about it, it could just be more on a personal level of, well, there's a scripture actually in the New Testament, right, where Christ is talking about the eunuch. So his disciples are asking about marriage, or Jews are, or somebody, and basically he has this interesting scripture where he says, after talking about like, if a man or a woman marry 8 guys, like, who gets the rights or something like that. But basically, at some point he says, but there are some eunuchs who are so born from their mother's womb, or those that make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sakes, or made eunuchs by men. Eunuchs were generally people who were castrated, served in like the queen's court or whatever, because they could be trusted not to do anything with her, right? And kind of like these kind of ancient societies of the Israelites found themselves among. But it also at the time was a very much well-known euphemism for homosexuals. And so it's interesting that he basically tells them that he says in this context of marriage, he says, only those to whom, this can be given does it apply. But he's basically saying, for the eunuchs, like, this commandment of marriage doesn't necessarily apply to them. And we never bring that up in church. We never talk about that. But it's just scriptures about eunuchs I've always kind of like been drawn to. Like, why don't we ever talk about this? It's not on our radar, right? We're just thinking about the kind of general populace. But what if there's more there? And in the Old Testament, it talks about how the eunuchs that would keep his Sabbaths and keep his covenants would have a name and a place in his house greater than that of sons and daughters. And I've wondered, like, what in the heck does that mean? So, like you were saying, sorry, I know I'm going on a huge tangent here, but this whole idea of this great, grand vision, there's really some things to unpack there. And maybe there's a lot that we still don't know, about the destiny of God's children that don't necessarily always just come down to, get married in the temple. Not that it can't be part of it, and it's a great thing, it's a good thing. But yeah, like I said, like there's so much more to the gospel than just the kind of milestone, myopic view I feel like we have of it. And I'm going to shut my trap now because I've talked way too much. But I appreciate
problem,
that, Jared. That was awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm really loving this session. This is great. This does ring a bell for me. So one of the things that I love about Jordan Peterson is he has such a great ability to foster insight, and also an ability to also overcome self-deception. And so let me unpack that a little bit. So when I was watching Jordan Peterson videos, when I was first introduced to Jordan Peterson, this was kind of like in 2016, 2015-ish, and the Trump campaign was marching along and the whole political system was being overturned, and then everyone seemed to be going down the rabbit hole, and everyone was taking the red pill, whatever that meant at the time. And I went down that rabbit hole, and I started like watching a bunch of YouTube, a bunch of political commentators on YouTube. My favorite political commentator at the time was Milo Yiannopoulos because he was just so funny, and he was a huge Trump guy. Anyway, but the thing that I noticed was that everything was sort of like one-sided, and everything was sort of like meant to destroy the other side, and people would even make videos like, Ben Shapiro destroys liberal student, or Milo Yiannopoulos, yeah, right, something like that. Or even like the Young Turks would do the same thing, be like Yank Uyghur demolishes Ben Shapiro or something stupid. And so, but then I started listening to Jordan Peterson, and he did something very interesting. He would present sort of like the frame in which everyone understood whatever subject he was talking about, and he would say, okay, that's how kind of everyone understands it. They're overlooking this part. It's if we now take this into account, this is the possibility, and this is why it might be helpful. And so he would, and then after that he would say, and then he would like steelman his opposition, say, but this is what people might say, or this is the negative side of taking this position. And so he would really kind of like steelman his critics, and then also like address them, and then also address like the insufficiency of the frame in which people were already operating in. And so that for me just like gave me tons and tons of insight, and it established a pattern on how to think about future problems. So anytime I'm confronted with a problem, I try to do that, like figure out what frame I'm operating in, figuring out what I'm overlooking, take that into account, see if I can expand that frame, and then see what the downsides of the current frame I'm in, or the downsides of the new frame I'm about to adopt. And then that helps me like overcome like some of the blind spots that I have, and also offer a solution. And for me, it's been so helpful, like both in school, in in like homework, and in my courses that I take. It's been helpful at church, and in talking to people who disagree with me on different faith topics, because it helps me like talk in a way that is both validating and productive, and kind of helps everyone like shed light on a subject. So hold on a second. Okay, so and then the other thing that I love about Jordan Peterson was that he would always talk about order and chaos, and what we know and what we don't know. And there was always a humility in there when he would say, you know, like there's so much more that we don't know compared to what we do know, and we know so much, and we're just trying to move the needle just a little bit to see if we can get it, if we can gain insight. And so when I heard President Nelson talk about, you know, lazy learners in general conference, like he was addressing the members of the church. He wasn't just addressing um, people who had already left the church. Like they're not watching general conference. The members are watching general conference. And I'm not gonna lie, I I mean maybe I'm not in a position to judge, but I feel that a lot of members are, they kind of fall into that category, the category that President Nelson is describing. And I look at all the people who are super 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 dogmatic. There are two reasons why people are dogmatic, as far as I can tell. One is because that's all they know, which is fine. But then two, because they're not willing to address like the nagging doubts that are at their doorstep. And so they just buckle down on the dogma. And that's where I see like the lazy learning happening. And I see that all the time, I think particularly on Twitter.
I think it's fascinating that you talk about that, because I think so much of the issue was people interpreting President Nelson saying, "Oh, if you leave the church, you're just a lazy learner." Which, when you read it in context, like you're right, it's not necessarily what he's saying. He's saying that all people, even especially inside the church, if we're not exercising that particle of faith, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard the idea that Laman and Lemuel aren't just the bad guys. They're representative of people of the church as well. And all of us have that inside of ourselves. You know, at some times we're feeling like Nephi, at other times like Laman and Lemuel, because they went with their father. They actually just did what their father told them to. They could have like outright just not gone. And so the Laman and Lemuel archetype in the Book of Mormon is those in the church that actually do what, you know, the prophet, or in this case, Lehi, tells them, but they're not doing it in the right mindset. They're not doing it with the right attitude. And this all culminates in this one story where Lehi has a vision. And so it's just like President Nelson having a vision or insight, or Joseph Smith. And Nephi wants to know exactly what his father saw. And so he works hard to have the faith to eventually have his own vision that confirms what his father saw and expounds it upon for him to help him understand. And so now Nephi understands and sees the same thing that Lehi or the prophet sees. And when he's talking with his brothers, Laman and Lemuel, they're like, we still don't get it. And it's like, have you asked? Have you looked for it for yourself? And Laman and Lemuel are like, the Lord doesn't, show us these things. It's just like, you see this all the time with members of the church sometimes. Like, it's either sometimes the more right-leaning members, they're like, oh, I don't have to think about that because, I'll just follow the prophet. Or left-leaning members is like, God's not going to reveal that to me anyways. Or, things like that. And it's just like, Nephi shows us that when we're following the prophet, we don't just follow him blindly. We have to go to where he is spiritually, be how he is spiritually, see what he sees spiritually, and then with that, continue in motivation to following him. So I guess those are my thoughts.
I think that's awesome. And yeah, when they had the whole lazy learning thing, like I personally just took it to heart to myself. Like I didn't think he was talking about anybody but me. That's just kind of how I took it. And I'm like, yeah, there's things I can definitely improve on, because I know I've struggled, in some respects. And so, like you were saying though, with the whole Laman and Lemuel, I think we've seen this recently too with the whole, kind of hubbub against or about President Nelson and the brethren, like encouraging vaccines and mask wearing, things like that, and how divided the church suddenly got. It's interesting to kind of like what more left-leaning members have kind of been doing before. Now we saw on the right more, where suddenly it's like, oh, there's kind of this, I don't want to say conservative brand of apostasy, but almost just like now they're having to kind of doubt and figure out like, okay, like is a prophet speaking as a man or as a prophet? And then they have to really do that spiritual work to figure out, okay, what is going on? And so I think that, God's going to afflict us wherever we're at. Any ideology we have, he's going to shake it up and be like, okay, like, are you worshiping me or are you worshiping what you think is right? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just been interesting to kind of see that across the other side of the spectrum now. Certainly no one is immune, myself included. So.
Yeah, I think one of the I love that comment. That it does happen to everybody. It's happening to everyone from every type of political background. One of the things that Jordan Peterson wrote in Maps of Meaning was he was talking about Jesus and how he's like the way that he sort of contextualizes Jesus within the frameworks of Maps of Meaning is Jesus is the the heroic individual that navigates order and chaos. And he points out in the book that Jesus not only is like the master of his tradition, he's the rabbi, but also he's kind of like that heretical figure that kind of points out like where
Yeah.
his religious system is flawed. And you see people like kind of fall into two camps. They either want to be like they want to hold up and prop up like the traditional side of things, or they want to be like the helpful heretic, but then they don't have a handle on the tradition itself. And I think that's why traditional members or true blue Mormons, whatever you want to call them, they kind of have a hard time swallowing what the progmos are saying because they feel like the progmos, while they offer a few insights, they disregard like the underlying tradition and they kind of like throw out the baby with the bathwater. Whereas progmos look at the TBMs and they say, well, you're just repeating the old dead, worn out words, and that you're not offering us anything new. And so there's that battle between the two sides. And I think like as far as narratives go and kind of what our myth is, the one solution that the church offers everybody, no matter what like where the background is from, is like to me this resonates a lot with kind of what Jordan Peterson is talking about is this idea of taking up personal responsibility and becoming like having your 2 feet planted on the floor and like lifting up your burden, right? Like because before you can change an institution, before you can make any type of progress, you have to like you have to clean your room, and pick up your stuff and like get your stuff together. And that means like you got to repent, you got to forgive yourself, you got to forgive others, you got to try to, yeah, and then not only that, but you have to be as Christ-like as possible. And like that's the
Yeah.
thing. I think is like if we all focus on being Christ-like, okay, maybe we won't all agree immediately, but we're all gonna get closer to like that same shared goal, and like I said, there's a lot of things we don't know yet. I don't know how this is all gonna play out, but I think like the insight will come as we try to be more and more Christ-like, and as we try to like get ourselves sorted out, so to speak, and follow Christ's example and become both, the master of our tradition and also like the person that in good faith and in like in a helpful manner like points out the flaws or like the holes in our system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it kind of reminds me of something that Richard Rohr talks about when he's describing prophets. He talks about how, that tension, prophets are kind of called to hold both at the same time. So they're kind of on the edge of the inside. And, Moses says, would to God that all men were, like all the Lord's people were prophets. So in a sense, I feel like we all have to get to that point where we're kind of in the same middle ground between those two kind of poles, that tension. We have to be able to hold both of it, like you were saying. And I don't know, it's just interesting for sure.
For sure. Jared, do you want to add anything else before we move on to the next topic?
Well, I don't know if this moves on to the topic that you were thinking of, but I was just thinking how this all kind of like goes into my presentation that I'm trying to do.
Oh, perfect. That's exactly where I was going to go. Tell us about your presentation. Give us a kind of like the preview for what you're going to be presenting on for Lobster Conference.
Yeah, so I posted a rough draft in the Lobster Conference group, and I'm still really trying to figure it out what it is, because I've been feeling so much pent up spiritual energy and yearning to like show something, and I think I know what it is, but hopefully it'll be more polished as the days go on. Essentially, I've been a super huge student of Emanuel Swedenborg, who existed a few decades before Joseph Smith, and he claims to have had Jesus Christ show himself into him and open his spiritual eyes so that he can go into the spiritual world, travel into the spiritual world, and document all the things there, from physics to roles of people to clothing to like how people interact and how the inner workings of the human consciousness works and stuff. And I see it so much of Swedenborg's writings in Carl Jung and in Jordan Peterson's talks, especially when Jordan Peterson gave his biblical lectures. they're so resonant to what Swedenborg wrote hundreds of years ago about the inner meaning of scriptures and the more psychological meaning of scriptures and how that maps into the human consciousness. And so one of the things that I've been doing is noticing that pattern of studying the scriptures with a more inward methodology. Like, how do you actually map these scriptural stories to something that's not just like a repeating archetype, right? Because in this church, we can accept like, oh, the things that happened in the past are types of things to happen in the future, and they're a repeating archetype. Well, that's kind of like looking into the future on the same level. One thing that I saw that's been very helpful to me, and I want to present, is you can take that not just horizontally, but vertically, deeper into who you are. And there's this model of consciousness that Swedenborg talks about. And I think Jordan Peterson also alludes to it in terms of like subpersonalities and stuff. Is every you are made up of two things, desires and understanding. So it goes to this grand duality of substance and form, or love and wisdom. It's this notion of it, just even in the physical world, you have energy and matter and energy are the same thing. They're so intimately united, it's just different states of what it is. And so essentially your desires are the things that drive you. It's what is your life. Like whatever makes you alive, that's what you love and crave. And there's, hellish desires, which is, the desires for destruction, having any very one serve you. And then there's also the desires for loving your neighbor and to love God. And then there's understandings as well, how those things are directed and managed and stuff. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is formulate a model of consciousness that can map to the Bible and the Book of Mormon, so that these stories that we read in the Bible aren't just speaking to historical events or even prophesying about future events or showing a meta-narrative about humanity, but they can also be mapped to your internal psyche. And like how, for example, fleeing from Egypt and being led out of Egypt is just like our oppressive thoughts and understandings holding down the tender feelings of love and tender understandings of the Lord from acting out and being its own nations. And so that whole story about the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt can be mapped to our own internal psyche as to how God, through his providence and through his word and through his servants, can actually help you overcome these oppressive mental structures that we have in our own brain. And so for my presentation, I want to lay out basically that model of consciousness. Not necessarily so much talk about its history, because I can talk about the history, for a while, but lay out a model of consciousness to get people motivated to read the scriptures with an eye to, okay, these scriptures can actually help me with my mental health. These scriptures can actually help me establish a kingdom of God in me so that I can, repent, so I can basically be a Zion within myself and be prepared to receive the Lord in my own life. So it's a lot to talk about, and hopefully my presentation clarifies that. But essentially, yeah, I'm presenting forth a scriptural model of consciousness, if that's the tagline.
That sounds bomb. That sounds like it's going to be amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to present, man. I wish you the best of luck. I mean, that's why I love Lobster Conference. Everyone has a lot of ideas in our group, and like everyone should have a chance to share them and make them as strong as possible. And I think Lobster Conference kind of gives people a forum to just like do that in front of their friends and get feedback and really like, I don't know. It's like one thing to have an idea, and then it's another thing to like get up there and like actually like share it with the world. And I think it's cool that we're all friends. We can all do that and share our thoughts with each other. And so, like I said, if you haven't RSVP'd, highly recommend that you check out Lobster Conference on the 26th at the Hyatt Place Hotel. It's going to be awesome. So I think we're almost done here. Any last thoughts from you, Anthony or Jared?
I'm trying to think of anything. I guess just in terms of like how I found Jordan Peterson, just briefly, it was really through a friend of mine who's a Canadian, like he's from Calgary, and he's quite like conservative, and I think that's originally how I like found out about some Peterson videos, because he's a kind of similar type of like Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, like all those guys. And I think that's kind of where I got kind of my first foray into it. And it's interesting because like Jordan Peterson like literally changed the course of my life, and he changed the course of like my career really, because I remember the time that I was listening to the most is when I was working at this warehouse, and I just, tiring job, like 10-hour, they're just like full time kind of shift at this place. And I don't know, I got pretty bored pretty quick, and I was just really unsatisfied and struggling. I was like newly married and stuff like that. And I was just listening to his podcast, like in and out. And I listened to some other like entrepreneurial podcasts and things like that. And I continued to get this sense of unrest. Peterson's talking about like take on responsibility, like, like figure out what you really love. And it like gave me the drive to quit my job and to apply to a different one. It just so happened that the place that my wife was working at, I was now able to work at because, when she got pregnant. But I basically went on a limb and said, like I need to take my life into my own hands. And Peterson really helped me to get to that point and feel confident in that. Just listening to him really kind of indoctrinated me, I guess, against the job that I was at. I knew it just wasn't going to go anywhere for me, wasn't working for my physical or mental health. And I feel like I have him to credit, honestly, for where I am now, because since I've been in this job, like I just keep moving up. And I feel like so much of what he talks about, with making your own meaning and taking on responsibility, has really been what's developed me and helped me to be the person that I am today, at least in my career. And so just shout out to Peterson for that, I guess, is all I want to kind of add is, I definitely have benefited from that. And just all the friends I've made in the group, you, just a bunch of people, even the people that I argue with sometimes, whatever, like I'm really grateful for the group and really the people that it's brought into my life. It's just been amazing and really life changing. And yeah, wouldn't trade it. I'm glad that I found Peterson when I did.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I love hearing those stories. There are so many people in our group that have like a similar story, where it's not that Jordan Peterson, he's such a great educator, like he'll be the first to admit that like most of these ideas aren't even his. They're just like the greatest ideas that have been preserved, in our Western philosophical tradition, and he's just synthesizing them and like and he's able to teach others those concepts in a way that they'll that resonates with them and that that they can understand.
Real need in the world right now, like he's really
Yeah.
bringing in a lot of people who are formerly just affected, like the would-be incels, the would-be radicals. Like he's tapping into something, for both men and women in our generation, I feel like, and it's really powerful. And I really believe he's God sent. I mean, the fact that he's got so many ideas that resonate with LDS beliefs too is just really, really curious. It really is. So.
Yeah, that true. So what's so crazy? This is a tangent slightly. So I remember his book 12 Rules for Life came out, and he was doing his book tour, and Salt Lake City was not on his book tour. And I was kind of disappointed. Like I think his next nearest date was a date in Colorado or something like that. But then his book tour progressed, and then he added a date. He added a date for Salt Lake City, and it was literally the weekend of General Conference. Like it was like that. I think it was that Saturday or that Sunday, and I was like, no way. And then it was funny too because I already had tickets for General Conference, so I went to General Conference, and then I remember I was like, man, do I pay rent this month or do I pay for VIP Jordan Peterson tickets? And I was like, frick this, I'm gonna pay for the Jordan Peterson tickets. And so I like told my roommates, I'm like, listen, guys, I'm gonna be late on the rent, but it's worth it. And so I went to General Conference, and like I felt the spirit so strong at General Conference. It was one of the best conferences. I think that was conference of 2019, October 2019. And then was that the same weekend? I kid you not, that was the same weekend that Kanye West performed with Sunday Service in Salt Lake City for free.
Wow.
So like General Conference was happening. Kanye West is an artist. I don't know what your opinion of him is, but like he has like the zeitgeist. So it was such a magical weekend. It's like Jordan Peterson, Kanye West with Sunday Service, and then Jordan Peterson later that night. Now I saw Jordan Peterson. Yeah, I know, right? um, like I'll admit though, I did not feel the spirit as strongly when I heard Jordan Peterson, but it was still quality, like wholesome, enlightening stuff. And yeah, like he does resonate with a lot of Latter-day Saints. Um, I invite everyone, like the Doctrine and Covenants. They say there's two scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants that I really love. I can't remember the references right now, but one of them is something like, learn from the best books. Um, learn words of wisdom from the greatest books, and then also something he was telling this to Joseph, and he was saying like, there are other holy men that not of that I have reserved unto myself, and to me that just says, look, like as Latter-day Saints, we can't just limit the spiritual inspiration that we gain just to people within Mormonism. There are so many people, on this planet. God loves all his children. He inspires all his children. They all have something to contribute. Some of them we don't even know about them. They might not be formally ordained into the institution of the church, but God works through them and to help us love each other more, forgive each other more, and grow closer to him. So um for anyone who is kind of like skeptical of our Jordan Peterson fan group, I don't think it detracts in any way from like our conviction of the gospel or like what we believe. We don't worship Jordan Peterson. I'm pretty sure there's some evangelical writer out there writing, Mormons worship Joseph Smith and Jordan Peterson. But that we both know that's not true. So anyway, yeah, all these J's. So I think that's our podcast for today. I'm gonna go ahead and just wrap up. Just last shout out, Lobster Conference, September 26th. Jared, it was a pleasure for you to be with us. We enjoyed your thoughts. Can't wait to see you at Lobster
Likewise.
Conference.
It was great meeting you guys too.
All right.